Disney Plus brings together fans of all ages. This podcast brings three adults who are also kids at heart together to talk about Disney Plus. Join Scott, the Magic Genie producer, Regina, the sassy Megara of the group, and Nathan, the gentle but grumpy Brit, as they bring you news, reviews, special guests, and discussions on the Disney Plus Streamcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Disney Plus Streamcast. I'm Scott Murray, and I'm here with Regina Davis.
Hello.
So, I don't know if you've noticed this or not. I know you don't spend a whole lot of time on Twitter, but it seems like and I will tell you I participated in this.
Oh, good.
There have been so many, and everything's a big announcement. Every single reveal is a big announcement. They've been saying, this person has now been cast in season 2 of The Mandalorian. And because that's happened so much just in the last 2 weeks, now everybody's making up their own casting announcements. And it'll be like, some random person or maybe even fictional character. It has been announced will be in season 2 of The Mandalorian.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I posted one that said, breaking, The Mandalorian has been announced to appear in The Mandalorian season 2. That's the best I could come up with.
Someone needs to take your phone away from you.
I know. Everything has been a big announcement. Everything from Katie Sackhoff to all these other people that are getting announced for season 2. I don't know where they're going to find room for them all.
Dude, I'm bonkers excited. I think they're going to make it work.
And it looks like they're getting deeper into the lore, too. So there's going to be deeper connections. Well, we kind of figured more was coming about Clone Wars or something because of Darksaber, but it really seems like they're going deeper than we thought they would.
Definitely, it seems that way.
So is there any of those announcements that really caught your attention? It's like, oh, I can't wait to see that person in it or that person play this or anything that's come out?
Well, Katie Sackhoff is just a gem in my brain because of Battlestar Galactica when she played Starbuck. Mm-hmm. Now she's going to be in The Mandalorian as Bo-Katan, who I've thoroughly enjoyed in Clone Wars. And so the fact that, she also voiced Bo-Katan in Clone Wars and is now just going to play her outright in live action is just stupid exciting for me. I really like it when voice actors get to play themselves in live action. It's not something that happens very often.
Right.
But when it's an action star especially, I already knew that it was voiced by Katie Sackhoff. And with all the things I'd seen her do in Battlestar Galactica, I was like, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if... And now here it is. Did
you see Katie Sackhoff's cameo appearance, or appearances actually, in The Big Bang Theory?
Mm-mm.
There is a night where Howard Wolowitz decides he's going to have how should I put this on a family show? Night to himself in his bedroom. And the way he wants to start it off is imagining that Katie Sackhoff's in bed with him. And she is, so you see what he's envisioning in his head, and she's laying in bed with him in her full costume from Battlestar.
Well, I think I know what I'm watching after we wrap this up.
Oh, but it gets better, because what ends up happening is, the reason for it is they're trying to show how really, that's used to be his old life, but now he's got this real girl in his life, so his mind is beginning to struggle. So next thing you know, he has his actual girlfriend there and Katie Sackhoff. And then at one point in time, he goes, I'm so confused. And then all of a sudden, after he says, I'm so confused, George Takei pops up and goes, oh my, can I help?
Oh no.
And he goes, I'm not that sort of confused. And then George goes, so you say, but here I am.
Jeez. Every time you say something like that, it makes me feel like I need to watch more Big Bang Theory. But then I watch it and then I hear the laugh track and then I stop. I just can't. I can't do it.
I know that they did do some of it in front of a live audience. I just never know which one's the live audience, which one's not. But that sort of thing rarely phases me. Anyway, that's a different show, different network, and different streaming service. We're here to talk about Disney Plus, but before we get to today's main topic, we want to talk news. So what do we need to do next, Regina?
We need to get some news from Nathan.
right, Scott. All right, Regina, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah, I could tell. I could tell you're doing really good because, like, you were just all up in that news, and I think we all know that there's only one dude who brings the news, but that's okay.
Other than Huey Lewis.
You know what, man? It's
Scott made me do it, Nathan.
I'm just saying. Like, man, next time I hear that, I'm gonna break the fourth wall like Deadpool and come straight into your preamble and just be there like, what's this news? Like the Kool-Aid man. Oh yeah, bring in the news. I'm just saying, you're on notice. As we were talking about, you were talking about, I was behind the credits. No, it's cool. It's cool. I'm not bitter. It's fine. It's fine. You were saying about Katie Sackhoff, confirmed as say confirmed. It's on Deadline, it's on Variety, it's on Hollywood Reporter. It sounds pretty legit as Bo-Katan coming back.
What?
Yeah, I know, crazy that, right?
Oh my God, thank you.
I know, you're welcome. Timothy Oliphant as well, also confirmed to be coming in season 2. As Scott alluded to, another one of those like casting announcements. Everyone's going to be in it at this point. We don't care. It's going to be good. We're looking forward to it. With a caveat, where everyone's like, oh yeah, Katie Sackhoff. Listen, I stand for Battlestar Galactica as much as the next guy. As long as the next guy really likes Battlestar Galactica. I mean, it was great up until the ending. But can we just also remember that Katie Sackhoff is only ever as good as the material she gets to work with. And if you saw her in that Netflix show, Another Life, you'd be really, really disappointed. So I'm hoping we get the Starbuck, Bo-Katan, Katie Sackhoff, and not that one.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, personal opinion. I know you don't care for it. It's the news. Facts only, please. But
well, then I don't know if I can share this.
Oh, go on.
Tied to what I was just talking about, I'm looking at Twitter, and Doctor Who Unwoke just announced that Weird Al Yankovic has been cast in the role as Salacious Crumb in seasons 2 of The Mandalorian. So apparently, he survived the assault on the sail barge.
Huh.
Are you Weird Al yanking my chain, or is that true?
Is that real?
No.
Oh.
Oh my God.
No, it's it's what everybody's doing on Twitter now because there's been so many announcements. So, in the same tradition that I talked about what I had done, I just saw someone else who said Breaking Baby Yoda has been cast in the lead role of season 2 of the hit series The Mandalorian. So it's just a Twitter fad now because there's been so many announcements. People are just having fun with it a little bit.
I thought then I'd been outscooped by my hosts, and I was like, wow, I didn't see that coming. Night of the Long Knives, just that's how you know you're not wanted in the old podcast business when the producer hops in your role.
I'm just BSing this at this point.
You know what, Scott? That's what you say. I'll wait for the invite next week, and we'll see how we stand.
Okay.
Someone else who's coming back to Mandalorian as well, and we'll probably talk about it because he's also in that prop culture show we're talking about later on. Oh, sorry, was that a spoiler? Anyway, Phil Tippett, who does all the practical effects and the stop motion stuff, he's coming back. He's worked on Star Wars before, and he's working on the seasons 2 and 3, so that's interesting too. You had asked me last week, Scott, about Tamira Morrison's casting, and was it confirmed for Boba Fett? And from all the news sources that are out there, they seem to be pretty solid. Like, oh yeah, it's Boba Fett, but here's a little thing that may interest only me. It may interest you. I like the merch and the toys. It probably interests me a little bit more. Hot Toys, my favorite brand of action figures, if you can call them that. $250 worth of 6-scale dolls with proper outfits and armor and all the rest of it in great face casting. They're doing a Captain Rex, and the Captain Rex looks absolutely the business. He's got his Phase 2 helmet. He's got his fancy helmet from Season 7 of Clone Wars. No spoilers, we're not talking about it. He just gets a new helmet. It's got all the weapons, it's got the pauldrons, it's got all that stuff. The face sculpt you get with it, they've actually spent the cash and licensed an older Tamira Morrison head. It's not like what you see in the Clone Wars. It's actually his face with a buzz cut. And so when you were saying about like, oh, is it him or is it Rex? I'm not saying it's not, and I couldn't prove this one way or the other. Why would you spend all that money on a Tamira Morrison head for Rex if he's never actually played the role per se? You just kind of think that's kind of what he looks like under the helmet. Why spend the money on the licensing? That stuff costs a lot of money. Anyway, I saw it. I thought it was kind of cool. If nothing else, it's a curiosity. And maybe it's just a portent of things to come. Speaking of something that you love to see as a fan, did you see that they've renamed Ben Nevis, the tallest mountain in Scotland, to Kenobi?
No.
Yeah, that was something that came out of the UK news last week. It looks like it's pretty legit, and no one's changing any maps, though, much in the same way Pluto is the 9th planet, and if you grew up at a certain time, that's what it is, even though NASA might say it's not, and just kind of like an exoplanet, everyone's like, oh yeah, it's like Pluto, it's the last one. Out of respect to, hometown hero, Ewan McGregor, they've gone and renamed it to Kenobi. It's not much of a mountain if you've ever seen it. It's a hill. But as someone once said, once upon a time, Kenobi said, I have the high ground, and now he is the high ground. So good for you, Ewan McGregor. That's fantastic.
Yeah, my dog will be very pleased to know something's been named after him.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Moving on to other content that's coming up on Disney+. It's the name of the game. Hamilton, apparently, hits on July 3rd. That's pretty massive. It wasn't supposed to come out for another year and a half or so, but they've moved it forward. $75 million it cost them to get the rights to Hamilton. It's basically a presentation of the stage show. It's not like a movie per se. It's a recording of the stage show. Shot, I think, a few different cameras and 3 different performances that they've amalgamated into one master performance. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who, won all the awards for it, he's crazy popular, and it was the hot ticket on Broadway for the longest time, said, I'm so proud of how beautifully Tommy Kail has brought Hamilton to the screen. He's given everyone who watches this film the best seat in the house. I'm so grateful to Disney and Disney Plus for reimagining and moving up our release to July 4th weekend of this year in light of the world turning upside down. I'm so grateful to all the fans who asked for this, and I'm so glad that we're able to make it happen. I'm so proud of this show. I can't wait for you to see it. I'm not a Broadway dude. We've said that before. I don't know that it's my thing, but it has a cachet and it has a reputation, and arguably it's a really big get for Disney.
Yeah, it's not really my thing either, but for the people whose thing it is, I imagine they're very excited and have every reason to be.
Especially if they haven't had a chance to go.
Oh, for sure.
In other Disney Plus content, Rick Riordan and his wife Becky both posted on Twitter earlier this week that Percy Jackson, his book series, is getting Disney Plus adaptation in the series. I don't know if you remember back in the day, it already had a film adaptation. At least the first 2 books did. I think The Lightning Thief, and I think there was one more afterwards, title of which escapes me. I can tell you that my kids used to adore those Percy Jackson books. The movies were really well received back in the day, and the first one, and good lord, it was directed by Chris Columbus, who has a pedigree for this sort of thing, after having done like Harry Potter, and before that even like Mrs. Doubtfire, Home Alone, all those things. Anyway, no news yet for casting or director or anything like that, but that's coming, and I guess hot on the heels of Artemis Fowl, another book that went to a movie that Disney went and threw onto Disney Plus. It's a good place for that sort of content. So yeah. I'm sure if you're into Disney Plus, if you're into the young adult books, then yeah, that's right up your alley, and we're excited to see it, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Do you remember? Oh gosh, a few years ago, there was there's a dude who was 17 years old, passed away from bone cancer. His name was Zach Sobiech, who had a big hit with that song Clouds, which it's a difficult one for me to listen to. I don't think you're supposed to say that the song isn't actually all that good, but it's a very emotional song. It's definitely a very, very emotional song. So trying to keep the pathos here, because I watched some of his story on Rainn Wilson from The Office. He has that YouTube channel, Soul Pancake, and there was a little mini documentary on there about his last days. And oh my God, it broke me, you guys. Anyway, his mum, Zach Sobiech's mum, went and wrote a memoir about the last few years of his life and how he started to write songs and how they were recorded and all the rest of it. And that's been acquired. They made a movie of it. And it's the first, I think, external acquisition that Disney Plus have made to put onto their network. They didn't have anything to do with it. It was solicited and they purchased it. You're going to find in that movie Finn Argus, Sabrina Carpenter. So, that's a Disney alum right there who's been in a whole bunch of Disney stuff on the Disney Channel. Thomas Everett Scott, Neve Campbell, and Jason Mraz as well. I say that because there's someone listening to this podcast who had a really inappropriate relationship with Jason Mraz back in the day. And I'm just going to call out and say, you're going to be triggered if your name starts with K and rhymes with Aitlin. You might not want to watch it or listen to it, but I'll be there watching it and I'll tell you what it's all about. And that comes on later on this year, sometime in July, I believe. Yeah, and other quick hits. Jerry Bruckheimer is talking about Pirates of the Caribbean 6 and would neither confirm nor deny that Johnny Depp is coming back. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Dropped a trailer on their Insta recently. So you can check out that for their last season. I'm excited for it. Mm-hmm. Frozen is the first musical that's going to be cancelled on Broadway due to coronavirus. And there's a little bit of a hint there as well that it cost a lot of money to put on that performance. And it's never quite broken even, despite how popular it's been. And so it was kind of like a done deal for them. They weren't going to make any money off of that. I don't know if you saw this, Scott, probably. National Association of Broadcasters this week did their online convention. They normally meet up all the little affiliates from all around the place and get together for their trade shows, all the local channels. And as part of that, they honored Jim Henson with a posthumous Distinguished Service Award. Lisa Henson and Brian Henson, his kids, respectively, the CEO and chairman of the Henson Company, were there, as was Kermit, to reminisce and accept the award on Jim Henson's behalf. I didn't know this. Whenever Jim Henson did Sam and Friends, originally for Station Washington, D.C., the original Kermit that was on there was made out of Jim Henson's mom's coat.
Yep.
I had no idea.
Huh.
Yeah, it's been 30 years. That's hard to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's and what a legacy as well. Muppet Show, seen in 108 countries around the world, 5 seasons. Millions of people watched that. Arguably one of the first family shows that, except for all ages, like anywhere around the world, didn't matter about the language that it was in. It didn't matter the content. It was just great for everyone, for all ages. And I'm trying to think of a show that's done that since. And I'm finding it real hard to think of something that had such a broad appeal that has been so successful since.
Well, that's one of the many reasons why Jim was a genius, because that's really hard to do. Really hard to do. Even back then it was hard to do. Because how many times have you even read the synopsis or a review of a family movie, and within the first 2 paragraphs, or maybe the breakdown of the review, they go, well, adults probably won't like this, but, your kids will. And the thing this is true of Sesame Street too. If you go back and watch some of the early days of Sesame Street that he was involved in, they're sitting there and they're entertaining kids and they're teaching them things, but there's stuff in there that would make adults laugh. There's stuff that still makes me laugh from those old things that I grew up with. Things I would, I might pick up now that I didn't pick up then. He just knew how to keep everybody included in everything he did, from an entertainment and humor perspective. And that's just really hard to do. And what's amazing about the Muppet Show is Jim basically jumped ship on that when it was at its height. He was just ready to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Rounding out the news this week, a couple of quick hits as well. Rob Liefeld, the creator of Deadpool, as well as terrible drawer of anatomy, if you ever read his stuff or look at it, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Of pockets.
Absolutely. You need some straps, you need some pouches, you need all the weapons. Rob Liefeld, he's your man. You need accuracy, you need anatomically correct.
You need
go
feet.
somewhere else. Yeah, feet behind a rock, always behind a rock. Yeah, you're not going to see those anytime soon. Shins, he's your man. Knee pads, we got you. Anyway, he's been, I guess, in the news recently after saying that Deadpool 3 has been kind of given up on at Marvel Studios. He went into according to IO9 pop culture website, recently spoke to their film critic Jermaine Lucier and clarified what he was saying. And essentially, it's pretty much the same thing, where he said, do I know that there is no movement on Deadpool 3 right now? I know that. Absolutely. Yes. And does that worry me? No, not at all. He said that he's seen their 5-year plan, because I think Kevin Feige is notorious for having all this stuff planned out years in advance, and said that There's no room for Deadpool 3 on there right now. I don't know. I know a lot of people were getting real upset about it because it seems like Ryan Reynolds, like he kind of caught lightning in a jar bottle with that particular movie franchise, and people were really anxious to see it. And the scriptwriters did say that they were coming back. It had been optioned, and that they were going to get worked in the MCU if they could find a way to do it. But certainly Rob Liefeld's he's been very vocal about that in the meantime. And I'm sure it has absolutely nothing to do with his lack of success in comics in the meantime and his royalty stream drying up. And finally, we're all watching, if you're into your Disney parks and that sort of thing, we're watching the reopening of Disney Springs this week, which is trying to reopen. It's, if you're not familiar with Disney Springs, we spoke about it a little bit on the show here before. It's kind of like the themed retail and entertainment center that's at Walt Disney World Resort in Orlando. It has a bunch of different neighborhoods, it has hotels that lead onto it and bits and pieces. A lot of that is still closed, but a bunch of stores are opening up this week. And on the 27th, the company-owned stores, including World of Disney, Deluxe Burger, and the Marketplace Co-op, are going to reopen. They've gone and shared a whole bunch of information online about what entrances are available because they're limited, the parking situation because they've closed a bunch of the garages. You've got to have temperature screening when you go in. And if you measure more than 100.4 degrees, they're going to take you off to the side and retest you. And if you don't pass, then you're not coming in. They're pretty strict about that. They've obviously got increased cleanliness deal and cashless transactions wherever possible. They won't take cash, but they would prefer it. And they're also going to want you to have appropriate face coverings if you're 3 and up. I'd say a lot of people watching this because the success of this is probably going to inform what's going to go on with the parks in Florida later on this year. Certainly, if you can't wait to get your Disney fix and you've got to walk around and see some stuff, then Disney Springs from the 20th, go have a gander, check it out, see what it's about, and let us know what it's like on our Twitter, which is at Disney Plus Cast. And that's what I got.
Nice.
Okay, so we've had a chance to watch one of the new documentary series on Disney Plus, and we're set to talk about it.
That's next on the Disney Plus Streamcast.
I think the discussion about prop culture today, one of the places that might be kind of fun to start is this is an interesting hobby. I mean, from a standpoint of being a geek and wanting to collect things from your favorite movies, I mean, we fully understand that. But, I guess compared to people like the host of this show, people like Dan, we at least have the luxury of just knowing where to go. I mean, you really have to care about this stuff to go hunting. And he says the thrill of the hunt is part of the fun. But the amount of work that you've got to do, and in his case, thank goodness he's made a name for himself in doing this because, now he's gotten this opportunity and has a little more access to some places, but apparently he had some good connections already. But that was the first thing I thought about was, as somebody who definitely likes to at least keep it simple, I guess, and get figures and things that are easy to find from movies that I like, or T-shirts for that matter, especially. I don't know if I would have the patience to go out and look for something. I don't know, I remember seeing something a while back where Mark Hamill got to see some guy. He did a little series and got to see his lightsaber from Return of the Jedi. And, that lightsaber is a big deal to me because I have huge ties to that lightsaber and that scene when it lights up for the first time. But would I go all out to find it and have it? No.
Maybe, but you're not a prop collector.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm just talking about the things that drive us and what we're willing to do when we're passionate about something. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that as much as I love to definitely have things from movies that I'm passionate about. I admire the tenacity and the willingness to do what it takes to find the stuff, because one of the things that's brought up a lot in the show, as you all saw, is, you know, especially for some of these older movies, it was like, all right, we're done, just trash this.
Yeah, people didn't even think to keep it. But
Well,
I think for this guy, I'm 100% sure that it's not just about, you know, the prop itself. It absolutely is about the experience. It's about meeting with these people and hearing their stories and having completely new context given to objects that, you know, he may have initially thought he was very familiar with. That's a lifestyle that I don't think he can give up at this point.
Right.
You know, to your point, green bladed lightsaber from Return of the Jedi, you can get a Force FX toy replica.
Right.
That hilt, it looks exactly like the right thing, and it lights up, and that's going to cost you about 150, maybe 125 if you're a smart shopper at retail. The an actual lightsaber from Star Wars that's used in the original trilogy goes for about $200,000. It doesn't do any of that stuff that the other one does. There's no bells and whistles, and it's probably fabricated out of all sorts of bits and pieces and just kind of glued or taped together. You see that in like the Tron episode where it's all just like tape on their costumes and everything.
On found objects.
Yeah, you know, and yet because of the story behind it, because of what it means, because of the emotional connection they maybe have to the business or to just cinema in general, it has that cachet. It kind of almost has that grail factor to it. And so one thing that I really liked about this show is that Dan, even though every time I look at him, I think, man, that's from that dude from Al's Toy Barn on Toy Story. You know, that every time I see him, I just think, you've got like a Woody in a box somewhere and you're going to sell him to Japan. I just, I kind of get into when he geeks out about that. And, you know, the story, I think that's something that the show is awesome about. The way it kind of tells you the story and the labor. And it's almost like respecting the work.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what's cool, yeah.
Well, and I think definitely one of the charming things about this show, especially right out of the gate with the Mary Poppins episode, I mean, it really does kind of have this sweet, you know, heartfelt charm in it, especially when people that were involved in those films get to see something from it that they were, you know, either wearing or using or attached to in some fashion, and see it for the first time in ages, because that's the other connection. I mean, you could tell, you know, especially when you're part of these iconic movies that mean so much to generation after generation after generation, it probably is emotional too, because, you know, there's, with some of these, these actors and other people probably thought they were gone for good. And you don't like to think about anything that was that impactful or that special, you know, going away, not being there anymore. So I think there's aspects of it too, you know, to be attached to something and have something like Mary Poppins' bag or something tied to these movies that you might have thought wasn't around anymore. And sure enough, it's still there. And just what a wonderful thing that is to think all those years later.
Right? The story about the snow globe from Mary Poppins, from the Feed the Bird song, and finding out that Walt kept it on his desk for the longest time, and just knowing all of that. And I think that's part of what made the show so exciting, is it wasn't just, here's this object, or here's a story about an object that we're going to try to attempt to find. They would, you know, present these things to the actors that interacted with them in the actual movie itself, and it was just so sweet seeing them see these items again, and then, you know, add layers and layers of story that, you know, we never knew, and, you know, we may never have gotten had they not been reunited with these items.
I think Mary Poppins, the very first episode you see, I think was probably the most memorable, just because they were able to cover so much ground with it. There are some episodes in this where mainly they're talking to people behind the scenes. Whereas this one, I mean, they had the lady that played Jane, and that was a really sweet moment, her getting to see her little outfit when
Hello,
she was a
old
child.
friend.
Yeah.
Oh, I lost it. I cried a few times during that episode, but it was the only episode.
Yeah, and gosh, getting to see Richard Sherman sitting there talking about doing Feed the Birds and how they have Walt's office still set up the way it was, and he was the only person, and still is almost practically one of the only people that's allowed in there to, and if anything, he's the only person allowed to play that piano. And to see Richard Sherman playing that song again in Walt's office all those years later was really something.
If either of you guys ever find that snow globe or a replica, please tell me, because I've got a real big pigeon problem, and that is one of the sources of it from my childhood. So, yeah, I mean, I've got stuffed animals, I've got mugs. It's a thing. So I would love to have one of those.
Well, we talked about Muppets. Do you have like Bert singing "Doing the Pigeon" somewhere on your phone or player?
No, but I guess I need it.
I think that's a Scott Murray cut right there.
The second one was Tron, which, I remember seeing that movie once, and I don't remember how old I was. I mean, I guess if I saw it in the theater, I could line it up that way. I remember being kind of bored by it. I want to go back and watch it again as an adult, especially after seeing this.
Yep.
Just because, I mean, it is really fascinating, especially when I love hearing stories, especially having been involved in some production work and being in those situations where what you plan doesn't happen and you have to think of something, and what you think of is actually better than your original idea. I think about what they decided to do when it came to turning those cars and why those cars are turning right angles. It's something they had to do, but ended up making it more interesting. But it was really something watching that show. And like you said, the costumes from it. And then, of course, the sign from the arcade getting fixed, I guess, without having to over-restore it was really interesting. It was fascinating to watch. Because if anything, despite the fact that we're just talking about props, I thought the other thing that was kind of interesting about it is you're still getting some really fascinating insights about the work that goes into these movies, especially Disney movies, where they are trying to create something, bring something to life that you haven't seen anywhere else, but on top of it, doing it 30-something years ago, trying to create a movie like Tron.
And something they said in the episode was, the way that they made Tron was something that they had never done before and would never do again.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the other thing that struck me most out of that episode was when I forget the guy's name, but he was asked sort of, is there anything you wish would have been different about the release of the movie? Because admittedly, it didn't do incredibly well. And he basically said, we just wish we could have sort of explained it to the audience first. Explained the concept, explained that it was experimental, and explained that we were sort of, what the message was we were trying to send. And I just felt that, because you can see, after watching this episode, really what their intention was. And I absolutely did not pick up that intention when I first watched it when I was a kid.
But, the cool thing about Tron, and it speaks, I think, to the way they've kind of curated the movies that they're talking about in this series, is that you might not have it for all of them. Like, for example, the Narnia episode, Pirates episode, it didn't interest me because I wasn't there for those movies. But for something like Tron, I can remember as a little boy just being like blown away by how those characters looked, and you had that emotional response. And whenever they're talking to the people, like, man, that interview with Steven Lisberger at the end, where the guy is like, the guy who like pioneered VFX in this way, the guy who kind of, oh my gosh, like whether it's me walking into an arcade as a little boy, arcades, you remember them when they weren't all Dave and Buster's and stuff?
Yes.
When walking into an arcade for the first time, seeing all the marquees light up and hearing the noise, the cacophony and all that, or whether it's you read William Gibson, like Neuromancer, and you kind of get the same vibe when he's going through Chiba City, and you're like, oh my gosh, like this thing is like complete digital, and it's like flashy and neon, and then he's not like that in real life now. He's completely over it, and when they were talking to him about it, and they were sharing bits with him, or Dan was sharing bits with him, you sort of saw him soften, like his bitterness towards all the film industry or however he'd been treated. It kind of like faded a bit, and you saw the life kind of come back in his eyes when he was talking about those projects. And that's just such a beautiful thing. And like you say, Tron, when you watched it the first time, if you did watch it and just didn't see clips somewhere, because we all know light cycles, we all know like the discus and all those things with the density disk, but honestly, you'd be hard pressed to explain the plot to a bunch of people or have people tell you what the plot is. But getting to reconnect with it on that emotional level was just, what a thrill. That was great. And to see it through that guy's eyes as well, just superb.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, in their defense, I mean, if they were attempting to do something similar to that now, which doesn't necessarily make sense because effects and everything are way different now, you could pull off so much more, just like when they made Legacy. They were showing the differences between the way they could portray things in the original versus Legacy. But, you know, back then, they didn't have the resources they have now to explain all of that. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking how they would do that. You would almost have to, you know, have like a media campaign where you're on Entertainment Tonight explaining it. And then maybe you just have newspaper articles written about it, or, you know, you do something on the poster that just conveys it maybe a little bit better. I just really don't know how they could have pulled some of that off even if they wanted to. It's interesting when you talk about the level of investment you have in this, depending on your attachment to the movie. I found that for me, it was a mixed bag that way. And I'd like to know just right off the top, before we get into some of these other things, which ones you were most invested in, either just out of interest, maybe you got a little more interested in the movie than maybe you did once before, maybe you've never seen it, versus ones you were definitely going to love. I know for me, Mary Poppins was huge. That was a big part of growing up. Tron, I just talked about Tron. Nightmare Before Christmas, I've never really been a big fan of it. And, you know, you sometimes will go to a movie and you'll be in kind of a certain mindset that almost prepares you not to like it. And I looked at Nightmare Before Christmas originally as, okay, here's Tim Burton again trying to make something weird and dark, and now it's Christmas. That's kind of my mindset going in. I've never been a huge fan of a lot of his stuff. There's been some things he's done that I've liked, but when it's just nothing but let's see how weird and dark I can make it, that just isn't my jam. Pirates of the Caribbean, I saw it once. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I saw it once. I don't even know if I saw the sequel to it because it just seemed to become unnecessary sequels. Narnia, I saw and I really liked. I don't know that I've seen Roger Rabbit in its entirety. I remember that my brother watched it like 700 times at the house, so I've seen lots of pieces of it, but I don't know that I've sat down and watched it from beginning to end. But throughout that entire episode, I laughed at scenes, and Jen was like, you know, you've laughed at this quite a bit. You probably need to sit down and watch the whole thing. So that's on the docket. And I don't even have to tell you about the Muppet movie and what that meant. So
yeah.
What about you all? What were some of the ones that impacted you one way or another just based on just being intrigued about it or just maybe your attachment to it?
Mary Poppins was the absolute big one for me. Just as far as influence when I was a kid, as many times as I've seen it. Tron, I watched a few times when I was younger just because I really liked, you know, flashing lights and science fiction. And then I watched it again as a teenager. I did find the episode really interesting, but I'm not particularly attached to the movie. Nightmare Before Christmas, I think, is pretty cool. I don't necessarily see the big deal about it. Like, I don't understand why we talk about it when it's not Halloween or Christmas kind of a thing. Like, I definitely see putting it on the docket for those holidays, but I see people that have, like, their entire, like, lives themed around Jack Skellington, and I'm confused by that. I think it's a good movie, but it's not... None of the rest of the movies in the entire season, really, were any that were influential to me, like Mary Poppins was. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. Pirates of the Caribbean, it was interesting to see how they did the behind-the-scenes stuff. The one that probably impressed me the most is just the crazy amount of work they put into it was the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids stuff. Just because I think I probably knew the least about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, because I probably watched half an hour of it when I was a kid and it scared the absolute crap out of me, so I stopped. And then Chronicles of Narnia, never cared about it. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, loved it. And then the Muppet movie never really meant that much to me, but after knowing you, Scott, I have a different appreciation for it, so I sort of watched that episode through your eyes, and I think it appreciated it more than I would have.
Man, I nearly had to put my bouncer jacket on and throw Regina out, you know, after she said that whole stuff about your Muppet show there, or Muppet movie.
Oh, you know.
Like, oh, I'm sorry, love, your name's not down, you're not coming in. Go on, clear off, mate. If it's in the 80s, I'll probably have some sort of a reference to it. The one that meant the most to me, and it really was a thrill all the way through, was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I can remember, oh man, back in the day, right? My mum and dad were broke, never had money for movies and stuff. And I remember the matinee, the late Thursday matinee at the movie theater, which I ended up being my first job, the Orpheus movie theater in Henleys, Bristol. I would get home from school and my dad would quickly shove some grub in my mouth and we'd run up to the movies and try and watch a movie when it was super, super cheap. And he'd been working all the time, so he'd probably fall asleep halfway through. I remember with that one, he didn't, when we went to see Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And there were some good ones that we saw, like Moonwalker. That was one of them. And, that's one with crazy special effects. And, I love all that stuff. But, oh my God, like, just the thrill of watching all those Disney and Warner Brother characters on the screen at the same time. Because, my dad, he brought me up on, like, Tex Avery cartoons and Chuck Jones cartoons. So to see all that so faithfully replicated, and just the homage to all the animation greats of that era, to see that behind the scenes and to see just how thrilled those folks were to talk about it and discuss it, and the way they super got into it, just how whenever Christopher Lloyd was looking at his Judge Doom costume,
said he'd still like to wear it.
Glowing. Yeah, and it's absolutely magical. I mean, everything else was everything else, more or less. I think Tron was cool, Nightmare was cool, Muppets was cool. Seeing how they did the car from driving the car whenever Fozzie's supposed to be driving down the street in Studebaker. But oh man, just the whole behind the scenes and how they did all the practical effects for Roger Rabbit. It was such a fantastic companion to my childhood memories of having that moment with my dad back in the day. It was absolutely superb. Couldn't have picked a better movie to get me into that show. It was fantastic.
I think the common theme I noticed along all the episodes was whenever Dan would ask, sort of, when you look back on your experience, what do you remember most, or what did you take out of it? And so many of them said that they never thought that what they were working on would become as legendary as it has. They all just did it for the challenge and for the experience and for the love of the work. They never thought it would become just as meaningful and cultural as it has.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting watching Roger Rabbit. I mean, again, trying to pull something like that off. I mean, now it probably would take nothing. Well, not nothing, not like it would be easy. It was not only interesting to watch them, what they had to do, especially with some of the props and effects with props that would take, I mean, you have to have the patience, major patience, when they're talking about putting things in one at a time, or how they had to take apart the blinds that Roger Rabbit blows through, and how that had to basically work one time.
Yeah.
And thankfully it did work one time on the first take. I thought was really, really interesting. And it was pretty phenomenal throughout this series, outside of the props, just people that agreed to come on and talk about it. I mean, he got to talk to some pretty significant names, not only behind the scenes, but also in front of the camera. What struck me was, geez, when was the last time you saw Rick Moranis? You knew he had a huge attachment to this thing because they're going to make something for Disney Plus, and they actually managed to pull him out of retirement for it, whereas I don't think they have been able to do that even with the new Ghostbusters movie.
Oh yeah, turned down Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
He actually said, I don't see the point in coming back for a day's filming for something I did 30 years ago. I'm not interested. That was the quote. That's what he actually said. And, that's a man who went into semi-retirement after his wife passed, so he could raise his kids.
Right.
And then just kind of was super, super selective about the roles and what he did over the last 20-odd years. So to get him back out for this now, and I don't know that there was any kind of cross-media branding type thing. I'm sure somebody at Disney said, hey, it's a good idea if you do this, being that, you're back on board. But I have a feeling that this show was already in the can for a year before they showed on Disney+. Again, it just goes to show the affection that some of these folks have for the actual, the movie that they were in.
And, I thought it was also interesting, especially when you think about some of the things that people consider walking a thin line when it comes to decisions they make in the creative process. I thought it was interesting when they had a chance to talk to Kathleen Turner. about playing Jessica Rabbit. Because the first thing I started to think, this is the mindset our culture has me in today. And I don't know, sometimes it's not always a good thing. I'm sitting here thinking, holy crap, they make a cartoon character like that in a movie today, and there's going to be outrage on Twitter. And it was interesting to me that Kathleen Turner herself had a role in how she thought Jessica should look, including how busty she was, because she thought it would be really kind of funny and amusing to have those things moving around on an animated character when she walked, and actually also thought she should be slimmer than what they originally had her. I thought that was really interesting because I was waiting for Dan to say, you know, did you have any objections at all at just, you know, the figure and how Jessica Rabbit looked?
You know, I don't think there's ever been an animated character that's inspired kind of a rush of hormones like Jessica Rabbit. You know, I think the only one that comes close in recent years is probably Elastigirl from The Incredibles, right? You know, I would never admit to it. I'll never fess up to it. But I am sure there's plenty of dudes out there in the 80s who had an awakening of sorts when watching, Jessica Rabbit on screen. And, you know, just, you say, hearing Kathleen Turner just like talk about that with, again, that joy, you know, like she's in on the joke. She gets it. Right. She just thinks it's so cool. And, you love it. It's absolutely fantastic.
And, you know, like I mentioned, I'm not a big fan of a lot of stuff Tim Burton has done, but I do like Danny Elfman. It was so interesting to hear him talk, because I've always wondered about the evolution from Oingo Boingo to master composer. And then, of course, he did Jack Skeleton singing. I don't even know if I knew that before. I mean, he's clearly got musical genius because he's involved in things from, you know, an orchestral standpoint, a cinematic standpoint, 80s rock standpoint, but also he can write songs that fit, you know, these type of movies. And I thought that was something that I really loved. Aside from the fact my own lack of personal investment in the movie, it was fascinating to watch his involvement in that, and also get kind of a backstory of how he went from 80s, you know, rock guy to this well-known and highly credentialed music composer for films.
Yeah, when it comes to the Nightmare episode, something which, again, even if you're not a fan of the movie, something that they do kind of write big all the time whenever you're watching this is you're always aware that this is something much like Tron they've never done before. It took 2.5 years to make that movie, painstaking.
Yeah.
And yet, despite it being so, you know, like particular and prescriptive, and the fact that one of the designers at the end says, yeah, it's kind of cathartic to take a sledgehammer to that at the end of 2.5 years.
Right. We started with an empty room, we ended with an empty room.
You know, just the adoration they had for it, like no one else had ever done that before. They knew that they were working on something unique that was particular. And, you know, they weren't doing it because it was going to make a lot of money. They had no idea that it was going to be a cult classic. It was just super cool. And I've been critical of Disney having kind of a bunch of puff pieces on Disney Plus, their behind the scenes and their, you know, insider looks and everything. And yeah, this one also is kind of going down that route, but it's done with such creative affection for that process that you can't help but be a believer. It's like the best bits of the Once Upon a Time, you know, the Disney show that had the behind the scenes thing, that the first one they brought out. You'll have to forgive me, the name escapes me precisely, but Once Upon a whatever. It's the best bits of that for the like the nerds or the geeks. And just to see all the different heads, because I think Dan Lanigan, one of his big things, his first big investments in props, and he's spent a lot of money on props. I mean, God, he's got like an Ed 209 from RoboCop that cost him like $80,000 that he bought from Phil Tippett. He spent a lot on that, but the Nightmare stuff is, I guess he's got an expansive collection of that. And not only did he have to pay a lot to acquire it, but also it costs a lot to keep it in good nick, because that stuff falls apart on you, which is something that the stuff off the shelf that we buy at GameStop and Boxed Lunch and Hot Topic doesn't do. Yeah. This stuff has to be repaired. And that's the other thing I liked about this episode in particular. You really got a sense of the labor of love it is to be a collector of that stuff and how much it costs to restore it and look after it and actually enjoy it the way it's supposed to be enjoyed.
Yeah, when it came to the Pirates movie in Narnia, there was some crossover there. I think one of the other great things about shows like this is it makes audiences aware of the hard work that goes into certain aspects you don't always think about. I mean, it's easy to go into a movie theater and, talk about performances and story. There are people in there with incredibly important work that people don't always realize the amount of work that goes into them. I'm definitely talking about costuming and things that they got to do. There were times in this show where they would talk about the attention to detail. It wasn't just a matter of making an item, but sometimes you have to do things with the item. Maybe it's wear and tear because of the character. Maybe there's other elements that have to evolve because of the character. I think about a chance I had years ago to talk to Bernie Pollack, who has done costumes for a variety of Hollywood movies. And I just remember him talking about, again, something I just never had thought about when he did, I think it was the costumes for The Natural. They didn't have any footage from that time that was in color. So they're like, all right, so how are we going to figure out a way to make costumes that work? So they would have to go to like the Baseball Hall of Fame and physically look at the details of old uniforms because, visually that was the only way they were going to get anything. And then they had to get it right. So I think it's really a way to make some of the people behind the scenes get a lot more appreciation. You think in Narnia and even Pirates, you just think, okay, well, they're going to have swords. Well, it's not that simple. They didn't just, go out there and turn a stick into a sword and say, get it. They got a blacksmith and other people working on this weaponry and stuff that take it very seriously and want to make sure it fits the time period, make sure that it fits the type of weaponry these characters would have, and that they look right and they look authentic. And I think that was another aspect of those two films that was really important, as well as the ships. I thought the ships aspect too, how they made some of the ships work and what they used in Pirates was also very interesting. But details like that, you just think, of course they're going to be on a ship. Well, you don't ever stop and think about what the production crew sometimes had to go through to make sure things looked legit.
Definitely.
Yeah, you always hear about the budgets for these things, and people, I think, get a little bit short-sighted and just think, oh, well, that's all going to Johnny Depp. That's just going on the cast. No one needs that much money. But, I mean, if you sat through the credits, if you wait until the very end, which I think is Marvel fans were used to doing.
For the right reasons or wrong reasons, perhaps, or maybe not the best reason.
But I'm just saying, though, you sort of sit through 10 minutes of scrolling text, looking at everyone who contributed to that movie. Yeah. That's where the money went. All those people have jobs. They all are very, very skilled in their field. They all need to get paid. If it's on screen, they really need to get paid because, they're fabricating that illusion that the quality of their craft is such that it takes you away from where you are for a couple of hours, assuming you remember to turn your phone off and the guy next to you hasn't dropped his nachos. It's a really big deal. And so just to spotlight these dudes, the unsung heroes, like you say, like the costume people. Who gives a second thought to the costume people? But then you see the sketches and you see the swatches of the fabric and you see the detail that they go into. That's where the money goes. That's why your movies cost that much. It's a lovely way to sort of crown their achievement. It's a lovely way to kind of look back in and look at these unsung heroes and give them, a bit more of a exposure to, again, if you've got Disney Plus, you're probably into all this stuff. You're probably into it a little bit, even if you're not super up on the details, but you appreciate the quality that the Disney name, inspires, that it kind of comes with. So to see these guys highlighted, it's a lovely thing.
It is. And you see them have a very genuine reaction whenever Dan sort of geek gushes on them about, how big of a fan he is of their work. Because, while they are attached to projects that almost everyone is familiar with, not hardly anyone is usually familiar with them.
All right, well, the last one was the Muppet movie. I have to tell you, full disclosure, I did not wait until I was at the end of the series to watch this one.
Did you watch it first?
I watched it third.
Okay.
And I was just heavily intrigued because I was sitting there thinking, okay, what could he have found? I had seen that in the trailer that they were going to show Gonzo's the metal plumbing thing that sat on top of his car. I did see that was in the trailer, so I knew that was coming. But it was really interesting watching the guy whose dad did the El Sleazo Cafe sign and how he got choked up about how much, it meant to him to be involved in that project and that he still had that sign. So that was a really interesting component. And it was funny, just recently, Jen was telling me that one of the times she heard Chris Hardwick talk about some of his fandoms, he's also a big fan of the Muppets. He said one of the times he actually got to interview a Muppet, it was everything he could do not to just be bawling the whole time or that he actually cried during it, which I totally can relate because I remember being insanely jealous when Super Grover showed up at Comic-Con and took photos with fans. Oh my gosh, you might not have gotten me out of that room.
Oh.
So here I'm watching Dan get to interview Gonzo, which I thought was really awesome because when he said, we're going to talk about Gonzo, we got to go talk to someone who's an expert on him. And I'm like, oh, they're going to talk to Dave Goelz. No, they're going to talk to Gonzo the first time. And I thought that was such a fun conversation that he got to have with Gonzo. I love the emphasis of, everything they went through to pull off the banjo and the swamp scene, and then how they actually get the banjo at the end while talking with the great Paul Williams. And it was so funny. My wife and I think very much like you, Regina, she's been around me enough now, and I've quoted things so often that she was actually the first person when they mentioned Paul Williams that she goes, Showtime at the El Sleazo. And sure enough, they cut away to that part where Paul Williams says, Showtime at the El Sleazo. I mean, I can only imagine what it was like to sit down and talk with him and then have that banjo there. And then the moment when they got to go into the museum and see some artifacts that are some of the Muppets themselves that Jim used was really fascinating on top of it all. So thumbs up on that one.
I really liked that we also got to see Dan hanging out with Joel freaking Hodgson.
Yeah.
Because I love that guy. I love Mystery Science 3000.
Yeah.
And he was also super enthusiastic because all the puppeteering, it was highly influential on him.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too. I mean, in the same vein, like a lot of creatives, you want to do it, but then at the same time, you don't want to seem like you're ripping off somebody else. So,
right. And and I'd never even really considered that. But he said whenever he was doing Mystery Science Theater, he didn't want to have soft puppets. So he, decided to go with them being robots instead because he didn't want to be ripping anybody off.
Yep. Good idea. Mm-hmm. Well, it also allows you to kind of distinguish yourself too.
Oh, yeah.
You put Kermit and a couple of those characters in the same room. I mean, it's there's a distinct difference between the two of them. I mean, in a way, the face of the characters from Mystery Science Theater are just as recognizable to fans and iconic to fans as, that instantaneous reaction you have when you see Kermit, Fozzie, or Piggy. And speaking of Piggy, she's not, my favorite, but it was really interesting looking at the costumes and bringing those ladies in who worked on the costumes for those and saying they missed doing it. Well, I'm sure after we watched this, you all were thinking about some movies that you'd like to see them maybe cover in a season 2 of this thing. And they've asked Dan about that in an interview. And some of the movies he brought up that he would like to perhaps pursue next season or in coming seasons if this continues include Home Alone, Edward Scissorhands, Dragon Slayer, Hocus Pocus, Star Wars, and Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Solid. Yeah,
that's a pretty good group. You think about Raiders, also makes me think of, too, there's a couple of, in Disneyland, there's a Raiders ride, and then, of course, there's the show at MGM in Orlando. It made me think of something else from this show when it comes to treasures and things. I thought it was really cool, real quick, that there's actually a prop from Pirates in the ride, sitting right there in front of you, and didn't even know that.
Me either.
I immediately thought of Star Wars, and I think Raiders is a great idea. And I bet there's some interesting things from movies like Edward Scissorhands for sure.
Definitely. Although what I want to know is where one of those daggum knobs are from Bed Knobs and Broomsticks. Because I want one of those.
But it would almost be equally interesting if you could almost make one of these like a treasure hunt following the steps to figure out where something might be and if it's actually there.
Yeah, I think that'd be really watchable.
And you'd have to think for the scale as well, probably something they could do because it's such a small community. Like you look at someone like Joe Johnston, who did Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and it said, oh, yeah, he's also done The Rocketeer, and he's done Jurassic Park, and yeah, he worked on Star Wars. Well, it's a bit more than that, right? I mean, he did Star Wars. He was the art director for Empire and Jedi, and the Indiana Jones movies, and he made like the Iron Giant. So like all these like cult things that we love and think, oh, they should do that. There's probably about half a dozen people in Hollywood that this guy knows really well, and he could say, oh yeah, absolutely, it's just in the crate in the back. Let's get all this stuff out. And, we're there for it, I would absolutely love it. And like you say, if there was the kind of treasure hunt thing, like the one or two bits that went to auction and went far off, then that's just a cherry on the cake, right? I mean, even though this dude, I have no doubt, if Walt Disney Archives isn't taking most of it, he's there kind of like doing a little bit of cash under the table and adding it to his old warehouse collection back in wherever. I would still love to see it because, he's, to your point, what you say about being jealous of the fans taking pictures with Super Grover. Yeah, you know what? I get that a lot sometimes because I'm a terrible person. But whenever someone is a true believer and they're super into it and you feel the love, you don't begrudge them that. So to see that man kind of get his grails, oh yeah, I'd definitely watch that.
All right, well, that's going to wrap up our discussion on prop culture. We will be back next week, and we're going to talk about a movie that came out a while back, but it's just now making its first appearance on Disney+. Next week, we're all going to get together and talk about a rewatch of George of the Jungle. So I hope you'll join us for that. In the meantime, please remember we are online at DisneyPlusStreamcast.com and on Twitter at DisneyPlusCast. If you'd like to reach out to us on Twitter or on the website, that's fine. Remember, if you're on the website, you can find all of the episodes and content that we've been recording for, I think now for the past year. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in today, and we hope you'll join us next week for another episode of the Disney Plus Streamcast.